I got this image off the internet. Somebody wrote "question everything" on a wall, and somebody else said "why." And I really like to meet the person that said "why," because you think about it: A, they got the point; B, they have a sense of humor; and C, they have a sense of irony. That's a rare combination these days, of someone that kind of gets it and is able to humorously bring up a thing that says, yes, that really does validate that sense of question everything. You know, I gave my talk title was Question Everything with a question mark after it. Because we are in a time where the need to be able to live in questions is more important and necessary than maybe ever. I think it's always been true to a large extent. I'm way more interested when I meet someone with the questions they're living with than I necessarily am with the answers they've come up with. You know, they say there are 5 steps to living an easy and perfect life, but no one knows what they are. So we tend to live a life of challenge. We need to be in that space of dynamic tension between the questions that do have answers and the questions that don't have answers. There are questions that lead to just more questions. The question of where was Brad's mom going after we depart this plane? There are people that think they know, but I don't think anybody really knows that. You know, we may just kind of not be in an existence where we're even aware of who we are in our history or not. We may go to a place and sit on a cloud and look at God. Or maybe we come back as a cockroach. I don't know. I don't know. And maybe, you know, my teacher, Dr. Bill Tolliver, used to say, when you've been asking a question for thousands of years and you don't have an answer, maybe it's the wrong question. So this idea of questioning is important. The thing is, we have to also maintain a balance between refusing to believe anything and believing anything. There is that dynamic tension. You know, there's a lot of information out there, and you know, the internet, we have access on our phones or our computers to most, if not all, of human knowledge. But I don't know if you know this, everything on there isn't true. So we have to be able to discern the value of information. And that requires not so much an intellectual capacity, although that's part of it. More so, it involves an emotional intelligence and a spiritual intelligence. Because when we're emotionally needy, when we're emotionally afraid, we tend to believe things that maybe aren't the best things to believe. You know? Has anyone here ever been wrong? Okay, a good number of you. What does that feel like, to be wrong? Not good, right? It's uncomfortable. It feels like, oh, it's painful, right? Well, I'm going to suggest to you that's what it feels like when you know you're wrong. Before you know you're wrong, it feels just like being right. I mean, think about that. Before you found out you were wrong, you thought you were right. You thought, oh, I can count on this, right? So that's an important thing to remember with the idea of questioning. I may feel very certain about something, but I may be misinformed. I may have been misled. I may be about to be betrayed, you see. But I can't slide down the other end of that slope and say, I'm not trusting anyone or anything about anything, because that doesn't work either. In fact, that's probably a bigger failing than believing too much. So we have to be able to develop a sense of maturity so that we can use our higher emotions, our better emotions, to discern the value of the information. The studies have shown that people that are more trusting tend to be able to identify untrustworthy people more easily than people that are not trusting. Because you get a radar, you know, you kind of have that inner gyroscope, that radar kind of picks up, well, you know, I know what it feels like to be around a person I can trust, and I'm getting a different vibe here. You know, so that's important stuff. And once again, okay. One of my favorite books, Catch-22, that I first read when I was in college, said they agreed that it was neither possible nor necessary to educate people who never questioned anything. You see, because if you don't have any questions, you don't have the curiosity, why bother to try to give you new information? Because you're just going to tend to put it into a slot that fits with what you already know. A questioning mind is a mind that's willing to expand, willing to take in new knowledge, willing to discard knowledge that no longer serves. You see? So that's a sense of maturity. Let's go to the next one. Next slide. Whoop, I think we skipped one. Okay. I've been studying Jungian psychology for about 25 years, and I really think it is a wonderful companion to the science of mind, because Carl Jung's philosophy of psychology involves the mystical and the universal and so forth, and how we as human beings, if we develop properly, develop toward greater and greater maturity and a greater and greater acceptance of our mystical nature. And James Hollis is a very prolific author of things Jungian. And in one of his books, he said, we need to periodically ask, what wants to come into the world through me? This is not an ego-driven, narcissistic question. It's a query which summons us to show up, to serve something larger than the familiar, the comfortable. Surely one of the most telling tests of our lives is whether we are living in a way which is driven more by challenge than by comfort, one which asks more of us than we had planned to offer. So if you've done visioning processes, which is very common for us in New Thought, that's the basic question: what wants to happen here by means of those present, by means of me and maybe perhaps a community of people or a group of people? What is being called forth by the situations in your life, both on the grand scale in terms of the global issues and so forth, like climate change, like the pandemic, like other things that are going on, and in your own personal life, your own circle of things that maybe are calling you forth to, that challenge you to say, there's an element within you that is seeking to awaken and express. And we know in this teaching that we are born with everything we need to live a successful life as us, as me, as you. But all of that is latent. It has to be drawn out. It has to emerge. So one of the purposes of spiritual teaching is to help people to be better at encouraging those strengths, those capacities, those faculties to emerge from within us. Next slide. He says, troubling questions summon us to a larger life. In the meantime, we all walk, in shoes too small. Nelson Mandela was quoted as saying, if your palms aren't sweating, you're playing in too small an arena. You know, I like to say, don't bite off less than you can chew. Because if it isn't clear that we as humanity are co-creating a call for all of us to grow, to become immense in our ability to deal with challenge by all the things that are happening. You know, we're the ones calling all this forward. We're the ones co-creating the situation of climate change and climate and all the things that are being affected by that. My daughter, the other night in New Jersey, had to abandon her car in a flooded road and walk 2 or 3 miles through waist-deep water to get to safety. 49 people so far that they found in that region didn't make it. You know, you ever smell smoke around here? Yeah. Floods in Germany. I mean, you know the litany, right? Well, what is it? This is humanity calling us forward to something greater. The pandemic, whatever the cause in terms of the actual so-called real-world cause, there's a consciousness here. And I suspect it has something to do with the immune system of the earth trying to slough us off because we're damaging the planet. And yet it's not the planet and us, we are all one. How do we right the balance? How do we heal the inner process, just like we would do with ourselves? How do we vaccinate humanity against our own destructive natures? See, these are big questions. And what is my role in it? What am I to do? How am I to be? What needs to be called forth from within me? I'm just going to put this. Oh, did that work? Oh, look at that. Okay. So Ernest Holmes, you may have heard of him. He says, we all wish to be free, but at the same time, we should realize that liberty is not license. To say that we are free with the freedom of God does not mean that we are free to do that which contradicts the divine nature. We are free only in that freedom which God is, the freedom to be alive, to enjoy living, to enter into the activities of everyday living with enthusiasm and interest. Now, there's been some conversation about vaccinations. And, you know, I'm online a lot and on several platforms, and a lot of New Thought connections within there. And I'm seeing a theme emerge from some that Science of Mind teaches we are absolutely free to do whatever we want, and including from some ministers. And my response to that, although I don't necessarily type it in, because sometimes it's better to keep your mouth shut, is I think you need to reread the textbook or retake the foundations class, because that's not what it says. You know, actually, it is what he says. In one point in the textbook, Holmes says you can have whatever you want. About 5 pages later, he says you can't have whatever you want. Now, is he contradicting himself, or is he raising a new level of complexity about the teaching? You see, liberty is not license. My liberty ends where your sphere of influence begins. And if I'm doing something because I want to, or because I feel I'm afraid not to do it that's harming you, I am violating a spiritual principle. Now, when we question things, we have to be a little bit careful to realize there are some things we can and must trust. And in our world, they include the spiritual principles that we go by, but you have to also kind of understand those principles. The principle of oneness, for example, that there's only one thing happening. Yet our senses tell us that we're separate. Our language tells us that we're separate. But we know at a deeper level, we come to know, hopefully, and we continue to deepen that knowledge, that everything is the same. There's one thing happening, and that is spirit, the universal, evolving and expressing as this universe and whatever other universes may exist. And we are within that dynamic, not separate from it, and not all of it. You see? Love only. Love love not necessarily as the romantic version of love, but love is the energy that animates everyone and everything. The animating energy of love is within you, it's within me. It's within the electricity that allows my voice to be magnified and the lights to be on and all the other things, and the energy of the oceans, the energy of the planets, the energy of gravity. All of that is part of one thing. Einstein told us that mass, things that appear to be solid, are just energy slowed down. And we are subject to the principles that guide energy. We're subject to attraction and repulsion and things like that. Let's see. So we can trust that. We can trust the idea of gravity. If you don't trust gravity and you jump off the building, you're probably going to have a little suffering in your life, at least till you hit the ground. It wasn't the fall that killed him, it was stopping. And I want to talk a little bit about compassion. I spoke almost entirely about compassion last week in Palm Desert, and I think compassion is important in this conversation about questioning, because compassion is a sign of the development of spiritual intelligence and maturity. to be compassionate. So the path to compassion, okay, antipathy is the lowest level. Antipathy is where a feeling of distrust, disharmony, of not liking or hating someone or something. Apathy is I don't care, right? The next one up is sympathy. Sympathy is on the positive side of the scale, but it's still a sense of separation. I'm so sorry that's happened to you, and inside my voice says, I'm glad it's not happening to me. And sympathy also involves, maybe you've grieved long enough, you're beginning to bring us all down, that kind of thing. So sympathy often is incomplete in terms of a connecting element. It's better than apathy, it's better than antipathy, but it's still limited. Then you have empathy. And that wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. So we live with it, right? Empathy is two kinds of empathy. One is intellectual empathy. I understand what you're feeling in a cognitive way. The other is emotional empathy, where you actually feel what other people are feeling. People that have a high sensitivity to that are often called empaths. And they don't have any necessary control over that. It just happens. And the problem with being an empath without an additional level of maturity is you can get sucked into some very deep vortexes of negativity by being around people that are in severe states of depression and things like that. So to be an empath really to be effective as an empath and to have the ability to really use it well requires a high degree of psychological and spiritual maturity. And then we have compassion. Compassion includes all of these and exceeds them. Compassion is a sense of oneness. You and I are one. I don't have to think about trying to be of service to you. It will kind of automatically happen. See? But compassion isn't always kind. It's kind when it's appropriate. It also can be tough love. It also can be cutting yourself off from someone because of maybe a seemingly incurably toxic situation. You see, people who are truly compassionate do not abuse and are not abused. See, because compassion, to be effective, begins with compassion for yourself. A deep understanding of who and what I am. Remember who you are. That's a call to compassion. Because who you are is a divine being having a human experience with all of the strength and all of the knowledge and all of the possibilities within you as latent possibilities waiting to be called forth. And so is everyone else. So compassion speaks to the possibility of the other person, not necessarily the behavior of the other person. So while you're acting out and maybe being a little bit of a jerk, if you have a compassionate friend, they're speaking to the part of you that's better than that, trying to elicit it forward. Good parents do that. They speak to the possibility of the child, not the behavior of the child. So compassion is built upon two things. One is humility. Humility is Humility is to live in truth. To live in real truth, not to put yourself up, to put yourself down, to say, this is who I am right now. I'm being the best I can. I hopefully will get better. Humility is not self-deprecation. Humility is self-acceptance. Humility is saying, I'm doing the best I can, but I probably will learn things later that make me look foolish for thinking what I think now. So humility is really important in spiritual maturity. And the other one, why don't you do it? Courage. It takes courage to be compassionate because sometimes you're going to look like a fool. Stephen Hawking, I just read this morning, once gave a champagne party with lots of very expensive champagne. The room was decorated beautifully. There were platters of food set out. There were balloons and decorations. He gave a champagne party for anyone who wanted to come. But he didn't announce it until after it was over. Because he wanted time travelers to attend. He living in the question, is it possible to invite time travelers to a specific place? So he looks like a fool for spending all this money and having no one show up, and he's just sitting there, which kind of what Stephen Hawking did, I guess, but he was just sitting there and probably feeling a little embarrassed, a little foolish, right? And then it got publicized. And I'm sure he got some comments at the next couple scientific conferences he went to. Hey, Stephen, you having any champagne tonight? You know, kind of a thing. You know how people are, right? But he was willing to do that. He was willing to seek to answer that question at least, or be open to the possibility, even though he knew it was going to make him look foolish through the eyes of some, and maybe to himself. See, am I willing to be a fool for a greater truth, for a greater version of myself? Am I willing to be a fool to help out someone I feel close to or I want to connect with because that's what they need in the moment? See, am I willing to step outside of how I want the world to see me so that I can be of greater service? And this has to do, you get the sense of spiritual compassion. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. The Dalai Lama said that. Now, he's a pretty compassionate guy, I would assume, spiritually mature. And if you've ever been around him, I've had a couple opportunities to be in audiences where he was present. He just has the best time. You know, I was in Fort Lauderdale one time. He came to speak at a university, and they were giving him an honorary doctorate. And it was like 100 degrees and 99% humidity. And, you know, the Dalai Lama comes up in his saffron robe and everything, which is kind of meant for hot weather. And the muckety-mucks of the college were all wearing their very heavy doctoral robes and the tam o' shanterns and everything. And people were literally passing out in the audience. That's how hot it was. And the Dalai Lama gets up, and they're going to confer this honorary doctorate, and they come up with a robe for him, and he goes, oh, no. Thank you very much. I will not be wearing that robe. You know, and the whole audience, you know, was very funny. But that's his humility. That's his saying, I'm living in my truth. I don't need the trappings of your thing. I'm here. That should be enough. You know, I can't be of service in my talk if I'm sweltering. You know, yet how often have we done things to be polite that maybe limited our capacity to be really available? See, and I'm sure there were some people on the dais there that were very, he wouldn't accept our robe. You know, such is life. Such is life. I'm pretty much finished. So to sum up, I'm glad you're enjoying this, because I really am. That's fantastic. And all the folks at home, I don't think I'm doing anything that funny. And neither do those folks over there. To sum up, living in a question, being willing to question everything, knowing that we're doing it from a basis of essential trust in certain principles. That I can depend on the fact that the energy that is me will continue to show up. I'll continue to be alive until I'm not, right? If I recognize the essential oneness of all of us, I can count on that to be generally true, even though at the surface level we may disagree and disagree violently. But if I'm not willing to step out on those skinny branches where it may feel very uncomfortable to ask those questions and to be in those questions and to not have answers, then I'm going to hold myself back, and that which is within me that seeks to emerge will not emerge. I'll never find out how great I can be. I'll never find out how strong I am. I'll never find out how much intelligence can emerge from within me that you never know, it may be just what humanity needs to put some things together to bring us to a place of stability and sustainability and so forth. Because if we don't figure that out, most of us will be okay, but our kids won't, and our grandchildren won't. I told my daughter a while back, I said, this is the first time I think I've ever felt like it's better to be old than be young. And I'm afraid that that's true. And I don't want that to be. So I sit and I think, I contemplate, how can I answer this call? And it's not so much what can I do, it's what can I be. It's a being state that drives our doing. Sometimes if we run off and try to do things before our being state catches up, we do more harm than good. Let's kill for peace kind of a thing, right? Let's get out there and confront the other people and get in a nice fight. Which doesn't work, in case you haven't noticed. 20 years of fighting in Afghanistan, all we did was delay their own development at great expense in lives and treasure. You'd think we'd have figured that out in Vietnam, but we didn't, because we were still thinking, we could recreate World War II, which was a great victory. And it was, in a sense. It was a defeat for something, but at what cost? I live in a place where, the bombs fell. And the memories exist, and the gravestones are everywhere. We have to do better. And this teaching is a key for many of us, not for everyone, but for many of us, a key to learn to live a life that lets us question valuably, lovingly, and effectively. So this is the info on my blog. If you'd like to check it out, I'd welcome you and your comments. I want to thank you so much for being here and being online. I love you. Thank you. Thank you.